I always kind of feel a little bit like minicamp, in a way, shouldn't have the amount of eyes on it that it does, because people are just desperate for content for anything at this point. And the media are allowed to attend. And as someone who works in the media, any kind of ability to get some interviews and get some content is always very, very welcome. So this is not a criticism of the media, but I do kind of feel like this is training camp before training camp. This is the initial installation. And all I kind of took away from minicamp was, isn't it great that everybody seems to actually be there, that no one's holding out, that everybody is actually participating? But instead what you get is, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, Sam Darnold doesn't look amazing. Is there a quarterback debate to have there? Let's ask Mike McDonald about it. Mike McDonald flips his lid. Then all of the other content makers like Rich Eisen and Mike Florio don't have anything to talk about. So then that's manna from heaven for them, because they can write something about it, or they can do 6 minutes on it on their show every day. And you are desperate and searching for things to discuss. I don't know. The NFL does a lot of things right. I think there are two things it doesn't do right, though, Adam, and I wonder what you think about this. One, it's not having anything that can fill this void between the draft and training camp, and allowing minicamp to actually be a media event. I just don't think either of those things are particularly well planned.
It's so funny having just spoken off camera about how sort of growing another show in soccer and not wanting to talk about transfer rumors, even though that's what drives content, because it's just terminally boring. It's amazing that like the big stories that have come out of minicamp really are the players that haven't got contracts, and it's mind-numbing, whether it's Shamar Stewart or Trey Hendrickson. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that they both come from the same team, or TJ Watt. And you're right, like it's great that hasn't come from Seattle, but it's almost like there's like bandwidth that has to be filled by something. And so I said to Stuart, my mate over here, like, it feels like I'm hearing about Sam Darnold throwing more interceptions than we would normally have heard about a quarterback. And I don't think that's because he's throwing more. I just think there's nothing else to talk about in Seahawk land, and that the column inches have to be filled with something. It probably helps a narrative that I think people would quite fancy a quarterback controversy this year. They're not going to have one, but I think people will be quite up for talking about it a bit more, if possible. It sort of seems a little bit milquetoast just going in to the season knowing who the quarterback's going to be, even though there's two other guys that maybe could steal the job. I don't think people are trying to drum it up as such, but I don't think people would bat it away if it did come up in conversation more concretely during actual training camp. But yeah, it's funny, like, yeah, it's one of those things that, yeah, the best news is no news, but then people have to talk about something.
So we've had this question, and if you have a question, send in a super chat. I'm going to make an exception. This is not a super chat, because I do think it's an interesting thing to start on before we get on to some more important topics. But Big Mike says, what would you suggest for the NFL this time of year? And there isn't a lot going on at the minute. I don't know about you, Adam. I will not watch probably a minute of the Club World Cup soccer tournament that's going on in America. I did watch England play an under-21s game. They drew 0-0 with the mighty Slovenia earlier today. So I watched that to fill some of my afternoon. But I have been keeping an eye on the Abbotsford Canucks, who are the sort of how we would describe it over here, like the youth team or the sort of under-21 team for the Vancouver Canucks in the NHL. So they have some senior players who get to play in that, but generally it's the players who need development, who are not ready for the NHL, and they work through. And they're playing in something called the Calder Cup against the team from Charlotte, and they're in the finals. So they're in the finals, they're leading 1-0. They won the first game controversially. They're playing the second game now. It's 2-2 as we speak. Adam, I'd love to see something where the teams who, you know, they're drafting all these young players. There's all these undrafted players who are coming into the league every year. And there are so few opportunities for these players at the back end to develop, to have some time, to make a career of this. It feels like, especially someone who does a lot of draft stuff, that any player drafted on day 3, that sort of moment of getting to the league is often short-lived, because they'll soon find themselves out of the league again. And shouldn't the NFL, something as big and as powerful as the NFL, have something where all 32 teams, like they do in the NHL, have a secondary team. You could put this in another part of Washington State for the Seahawks point of view, and that it would be almost like a B team, a reserve team, a youth team for players that they've signed or drafted who they can associate to this. Maybe they could do it for 2 years before they have to make a decision whether to move them onto the main roster or not. Maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's just their rookie contracts, to provide some development, to provide some competition, because it wouldn't be the best quality of football and it wouldn't have a massive audience. But if we were watching right now a summer league where young Seahawks players were playing against, let's say, young 49ers players, I think that'd be something that would be interesting and would fill the void a little bit.
It's really funny. I was listening to a podcast talking about why isn't there an alternate league? Like, why isn't there a Europe league? Why isn't there like the XFL? Why did it fail? And the conclusion they came to was, unless you make some tweaks to the rules whereby it attracts attention that way, people don't want to watch just a worse version of the product that they like already. But I think what you've come up with there is actually great, because it gives you a means to an end for why the games are happening. It's not just a competition where someone wins the, Inferno Bowl at the end of it and no one really there's no structure and there's no reason for it. But if there was a league where it was purely developmental and the results didn't matter as much as watching these guys play, I think people would get right behind that. And actually, as we're talking sort of crackpot ideas, one that I've always had that maybe would benefit the day two guys more is, so in soccer, for people that don't know, you can loan players. So the Seahawks would retain Elijah Arroyo's contract, for example, but we could loan him to the Tennessee Titans for a season where he could play a full season and then come back to Seattle with the development. He's developed for a year, played more games and comes back a better player, which benefits the Titans hopefully in the short term, Seahawks in the long term. And I would love to see that, particularly for someone like Milroe, for example. Is there a team that is not going to play for Seattle this year, but would he play for another team for a year next year and everyone wins? So that's the kind of thing that I'd love. And this part of the year when people people are going to say, no, I totally understand it. It's completely different. It's a wild, it's June 15th. We've got to fill the time somehow. I would love to see that as my sort of mad way to fill the time.
I was struggling for the term that they would use in North America to describe this, and thankfully, Jen has posted it. Farm team. That's what they have in the NHL. They have, the Abbotsford Canucks are a farm team, and I also quite like, because I used to live in I lived in Abbotsford for about 3 or 4 weeks when I initially moved to Canada before moving to downtown Vancouver. So I kind of have a little soft spot for them. But when I look at the Canucks team, and people won't know who the Canucks are, but people like Linus Karlsson and the netminder, for example, and one or two others, Victor Mancini, Artur Silovs is the netminder. They've played for the Canucks. They're now playing for Abbotsford. In this system that I'm coming up with here, I know we've completely gone off on a tangent. If you had a farm team in, I don't know, pick somewhere, Renton, I don't know, pick a place, okay? And they were the Renton Seahawks or something, and they were playing the Santa Clara Niners, and they played 8 games, home and away against, it wouldn't be 8 games, 6 games, home and away against the other NFC West teams. Whoever wins the division, maybe you could chuck another couple of games in there against other teams. Whoever wins the division goes into a playoff format. You have a playoff format. And Jalen Milroe, drafted in round 3, could play in that. He could play in that this summer. So instead of being the third quarterback, because once you get to training camp, the number of reps for Milroe are going to be limited at quarterback, and that's going to go on into the season. But if you give him a summer playing in your offensive system, playing actual football games, that would be entertaining. And it wouldn't just have to be him. If you drafted a quarterback in the first round, you just didn't intend for them to necessarily play as a rookie, you could play them in that kind of a farm team system over the summer. And I think that would be interesting. I just think that would be something that could fill this void better than having the reporters go down to minicamp and picking over who does what, when minicamp really is, you're not getting anything out of the defense from that. The receivers are not even competing against defensive backs, as far as I'm aware. They're thrown against thin air. It's very hard to desk for anything. And I'd love to see that. Imagine if there was a game tomorrow and a Jalen Milroe-led young Seahawks team was playing the Niners with Curtis Rourke at quarterback, for example, who they drafted. That'd be great. I think that would definitely be. Maybe that's because I'm a nerd who loves the NFL, but that would definitely be something that could kill 3 hours for me in the evening. And I think there'd be a lot of people would watch that, Adam.
We're also used to reserve teams. I'm thinking, do you think the comments for this show are going to have the most two Brits trying to ruin our game? You don't know football. Go back to soccer. You're not welcome here. I think this one could set the record for that, because we really are just trying to just knacker their game, and we're here for it. I love it. It's great.
No, I actually think, on the contrary,
progress is always good, Rob.
I think the majority of people listening to, I had no idea we were going to talk about this today. This is not on the list of things I'd written down, but I think a summer league where your young players can go and play, the ones who are not necessarily going to start for you next year, or the ones who are competing to try and make a point that they could, I think that would be a fun little addition to the NFL. And also, it would give players a bit more time to develop, to be coached, to have an opportunity to get a career. Because one of the things we all talk about, who follow the NFL and write and comment about the NFL, is how difficult it is for young quarterbacks. And if they can go to something like this and make mistakes and learn their professional lives in this kind of like format before coming back to the pro teams, I think that would be good. So I'm here for a farm system that creates a summer league, and for me that would be better than a bajillion international games to try and extend out the league. I do wonder where this is going to go with international games, Adam. They've got a game in Australia next year. If the Seahawks are playing in Melbourne against the Rams, I will definitely be going to that. But I still wonder, London's a long way away from America. Australia's even further away. And you do wonder a little bit, how do you go and play an NFL game and then get back to America having gone to Australia? That's not a quick trip. Like when the England cricket team go and play the Australian cricket team, they tend to go down like 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they actually play the first meaningful match, because they need time to acclimatise. I think a farm system league would be a better use of time and resource than just sort of trying to take these games to Brazil and Australia, and yes, having endless games in Europe as well. That's just my opinion. I don't know what you think, Adam.
I agree. I mean, look, we're seeing the Club World Cup being played in America right now, which is nothing more than a money grab. And at some point, these NFL games are just becoming a complete money grab. I mean, there's a game in Madrid that I might go to see the Commanders, but it's just tourism as opposed to sport. And people need to be very, very cautious about diluting the passion of sport to turn it into entertainment. Like we don't want these games to become like concerts. Like they're our blood and our lives, and the last thing we want is for them to become just arbitrary entertainment events.
Do you think the NFL fans will speak up though? Because for people who aren't aware in the States, they pitched the idea of having an extra Premier League game. They called it the 39th game, and they were going to play that in America. And the fans over here said, over my dead body, frankly, and it's never happened.
I protested.
Yeah, I mean, they said it's never going to happen. It hasn't happened. But the original idea, long before the NFL thought about international games, was for the Premier League to do that, and it's not happened. But the NFL's done it. It's then expanded it. It's expanding it again to the point that every team may play a game abroad in the future, Adam. And it just seems to just go along unchallenged almost. You may see a whinge on Twitter about it, but it's unchallenged. And I wonder if fans in the States will eventually make themselves heard, because look, we're both international fans, but I think there is a danger of it becoming too much of a, like you say, a tourism thing, and you end up diluting the game. I personally love nothing more than a home crowd revved up, getting behind their team, and a road team trying to deal with that circumstance. The minute that you go to, like you say, Madrid, London, Brazil, Australia, wherever they're going to go, Mexico, it becomes, yeah, like you perfectly put it. It's an opportunity for people to take their phones and take a million pictures and have a few beers.
Yeah, I mean, if I go to Madrid, it's going to be me, my mate, and our 2 wives, and we're going to, just go for that exact reason. And that's not really what sport's supposed to be for. I mean, I wouldn't even support a London team if there were a full-time franchise here. But I support the Seahawks, and that's not going to change. I'd probably want the London team to lose, to be honest. Like, I would take that side of it as opposed to wanting them to win. Again, that's another thing that just seems completely misguided and misjudged. Like, the NFL have done a really good job in making international fans pick a team to support. And I think trying to implant other teams into those cities where there's existing fan bases would be a terrible idea.
I completely agree. I've never liked that idea. And I don't know what the NFL's thinking. Like, everybody, you only have to go to one of the London games and just see the variety of jerseys that are there. Like, everybody's got their own team. Everyone's adopted a team by now. The idea that you live in London and you say you wouldn't root for them, there's no way that I'm traveling 2.5, 3 hours, 8 or 7 or 9 times, whatever it is, to go and watch a team in London play when I'm a Seahawks fan. That's just, I'd only go and watch them if they're playing Seattle. So I wish they would get rid of that idea. Anyway, it's supposed to be a bit about minicamp, so I'm going to get it back on track here. Here's what I wanted to bring up about Sam Darnold. So there's been 2 things that the people who report on the team have said recently. Now, one of them I wrote about, Brady Henderson, who is the best in the business when it comes to reporting on Seattle. Like, when Brady writes something or speaks, I'm listening to him. And he did a really good segment on Seattle sports where he spoke and he revealed, this is when he says something, he's not just plucked it out of thin air. He's got the sources. You have to listen to what he said. And he made it clear that one of the reasons why the Seahawks had moved away from Geno Smith and gone towards Sam Darnold was a leadership thing. Now, I'd heard some similar things, that he and DK Metcalf didn't get on, and that part of the reason why they didn't get on is because they clashed, because Geno Smith is very good at going out in a press conference after the game and being accountable, not so much in the locker room. There was a lot of finger pointing there. There was a lot of calling out of teammates and didn't handle the difficult moments particularly well. Brady Henderson's he has mentioned that now and has laid it all out for everybody to see. That's one of the reasons why they've moved on. So I'll ask you about that in a second, Adam. There's something else, though, that came out. Now, I've not listened to this. Curtis Allen, the great Curtis Allen, has listened to... Greg Bell went on one of the podcasts this week. Thankfully, Curtis listened to it, so I didn't have to. But Greg Bell apparently said of Sam Darnold that he didn't look as bad as Sam Howell last year at minicamp, but implying he wasn't very good. And that he also said it's a good thing they're going to run the ball a lot this year. So, 1, what do you make of the leadership thing, Adam? And 2, do you have any concern if that is one person's review of what he's seen from Sam Darnold, that he's even mentioned that he maybe looks as bad as Sam Howell? I'll give you my thoughts on that in a second.
I tend to not give Greg Bell's commentary much thought. Personally, that may be an unpopular view, but he's made some really bold claims over the past few years that have been very swiftly debunked by actions, trades, for example, that have happened that we've been guaranteed will definitely not happen. And with all due respect to Greg, he strikes me as the kind of person reporting what he's being told to report by certain sectors. He has full right to reply. I'd very happily listen to it. But if you put Greg Bell in a room versus Brady Henderson and you try to compare the coverage, for example, I would suggest there's quite a stark difference between the two. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible to, because we're on a show here as opposed to talking on WhatsApp. But that would be my view on Greg Bell. Not that he doesn't have his insights and his contacts, but personally, he's not for me. The leadership thing, it did strike me that McDonald was very relaxed speaking about Darnold as a guy. Almost when he had his press conference, that felt like when he settled into kind of just shooting the breeze more than any other time during the press conference. I don't know if he maybe didn't see Geno as the leader that some do. And we're not in the locker room, we don't know these people. It's very hard to speak other than what we see from press conferences, on the podium, on the sideline. I also got an element from Gino that it was a bit false. He struck me as a bit of a decaf Russell Wilson when he came to the podium, in that he was saying what I think he thought people wanted to hear, and it didn't strike me as completely natural. Whereas I think with Darnold, it does come across as a bit more laissez-faire, and he California kid. Maybe that just is his makeup, but that's just my view. But definitely, I'm really pleased you brought that up, because when I watched McDonald speak about Darnold, it felt like he settled in to talking about him in a much more comfortable way than he was with certain other questions.
Yeah. So my thought on this is I'm not surprised at what Brady Henderson said at all, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the Seahawks want a quarterback who can do what they need him to do, and I think Brady Henderson admitted this, that if you were to probably get them over a beer or 6 and get them to admit that they'd probably say to you that Geno Smith is a more talented quarterback. But the difference is that they think Sam Darnold is going to be a better leader. So how does that translate to the field? Well, I think we're going into a system now for the first time in a long time in Seattle where the system is going to be more important than the man throwing the football. I think under Russell Wilson, especially with the offensive coordinators that he worked with, there was often just a need and a desperation for him to make something happen. And with Ryan Grubb and Shane Waldron, we now know, looking back on hindsight, that they were not very good offensive coordinators. And I think there was a lot of pressure on Geno Smith to be physically a difference maker at times and to make things happen. And I think that's going to be less of the case now. They are going towards something that is going to look very similar to the Kyle Shanahan system. And I'm pretty sure that if you looked at Jimmy Garoppolo or Brock Purdy or players, or even Kirk Cousins, who had success with Shanahan in Washington, if you looked at any of those players in a minicamp, they probably didn't blow you away with their physical talent, but can they execute the system? And I think that when they look at Sam Darnold, they'll look at somebody who can execute the system. So he might not look as good stepping back, throwing it downfield. There may be some settling in moments during minicamp. I've no doubt during the season that Sam Darnold may well have the odd bad game, or a game where it's going to be up to the defense to win the day, or the running game, or the opponent just being awful to win the day. But I think they are looking for something that is built around a system now where everybody contributes. And I'm happy to give that a go after many years of sort of just looking at the quarterback and saying, well, go on, do something then, which is kind of what it's felt like they've needed to do. As for the take from Greg Bell, I don't know how you can, judge quarterbacks in minicamp. I just really don't. And I think you've got to be really careful saying stuff like, not as bad as Sam Howell last year, but and it's a good thing they're going to run the ball a lot this year. This is minicamp. If we're still saying these things in the final week of training camp, then I think it'd be worth paying more attention to. But to me, that just seems unnecessary. And this is a quarterback who is in Seattle for the first time and is probably going to have to adjust to things and is throwing to people he's only just really met and doesn't have chemistry with yet. So I think he needs to pump the brakes on that a little bit too much. There's a bit too much reading into things at minicamp. And I thought that was interesting when Mike McDonald was asked by Mike Salk about whether there's a quarterback competition going on or whether there's any chance Sam Darnold loses his job, that Mike McDonald just flipped. He called it a crazy question. He went above and beyond to sort of nip that in the bud at him, which makes it pretty clear that Sam Darnold's going to get every opportunity. Even though I read an article this week saying that Jalen Milroe has been going into the training facility at 4:30 in the morning to sort of try and do his best, maybe to create a good impression. There's not going to be any quarterback competition here. Like, this is going to be Sam Darnold's job, and it's going to be up to him to keep that job. Can I ask you about that, by the way? How do you feel about that? Like, I always kind of think this is very NFL. There's not many other sports where someone would, like, eventually we're going to have somebody who just never goes home. Like they're just going to come out and someone's going to do an interview. Goes, yeah, Jalen Milroe. Do you know what? He stayed all night on just throwing footballs, and then when we got up, and came to work the next day, he was still there, and he just hadn't slept. He's just done a whole day. Like, does anybody ever really need to be at work at 4:30 when everybody else is starting at, let's say, 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever?
It's amazing that the first person that I recall really hearing this about was Russell Wilson, who shortly came out with a phrase, no time to sleep. And I'm thinking, like, you need to get some sleep, mate. Like, it's one of, if not the most important thing to do for yourself is to go to sleep. The kind of, I don't know how to say it without PC, without sort of demonetizing the show. The impendage wavingness about how late someone is in and how early someone's in is just an amazing thing. And it's certainly something you would not see in soccer, I think, where they are delighted to know they can be in as late as possible and out as early as possible. I forgot that. I actually...
Just on that, I mean, over here, typically if you say we're starting at 10, like everybody turns up at 10, sometimes a little bit later. And what you would do in English football is a player might stay after training to do a little bit extra, but they'd never come in at 4:30. Adam. I mean, that's just... You'd
get battered by the rest of your teammates if you did. Absolutely battered. I forgot that, going back to the previous bit, I actually texted someone who was at training camp, a journalist, and he has never had any issues in flaming quarterback play that's bad. I mean, and actually Sam Howell is a guy that he was particularly critical of. And after the Salk McDonald press conference, I texted him saying, this Darnold thing seems a little bit odd already. I'm not sure what's going on. And he said, Darnold wasn't that bad at all, but credit to Salk for stirring the pot. So from that exchange, that would suggest to me that he was levels and levels above what they were seeing from Sam Howell last year, because I've got the receipts of those from people that were there, and they are not good at all.
The Seattle Seahawks didn't stumble into the offseason. Instead, they literally dissected it. Neither there's any nostalgia, nor is there any reactionary patchwork. Apparently, it looks like a whole new change in their identity and strategy. Head coach Mike Macdonald wasn't brought in to maintain, but elevate. And everyone inside the building knows it. Let's break down how Seattle stripped away its offensive past, leaned into its defensive identity, and began crafting one of the most unpredictable plans in the NFC. Mike Macdonald arrived only to fix a defense that had stopped disguising its flaws. He walked into a roster loaded with offensive names and defensive regression. So the Seahawks cut from the front. Geno Smith was traded, and DK Metcalf followed. Also, Tyler Lockett was released. That's 3 major offensive figures erased in months. Seattle probably wanted to win 2017 with controlled drives, suffocate coverages, and pre-snap deception. Indeed, Sam Darnold isn't Geno Smith, but Seattle doesn't want him to be. They signed him for 3 years at $100.5 million because he executes. Interestingly, to rebuild the WR room, they signed Cooper Kupp. He's 31, battled injuries, but knows timing routes and can read coverages mid-snap. This is expected to give Darnold a calming presence on third downs. Reportedly, the Seahawks want a quarterback who protects the ball and a receiver who finds space, and that combination made for 10-play drives. Not everything was reconstructed, though. Certain pillars stayed because they mattered. Jarran Reed re-signed. So did Ernest Jones IV. Both became the primary component of Seahawks' new defensive structure. Here, Reed seems to be the plug in the middle, and Jones is expected to be the communicator and enforcer behind him. According to analysts, Macdonald's scheme demands alignment precision. It needs pre-snap shifts that bait mistakes. That's why keeping Jones mattered. He knows where every piece belongs. In addition, his leadership goes beyond the huddle because it defines how the front seven operates. When speaking to the media, Jones and Reed both talked about clarity. Seattle approached the draft like a chess match. They chose Gray Zabel in the first round to fortify the offensive interior. They also picked Nick Emanwari, a safety with length and anticipation, only to disguise coverage shells. And importantly, they added Jalen Milroe in round 3. He's not here to start, but to learn. This draft is likely about coachable fits, because here, every rookie brings range, strength, and awareness. Notably, Seattle's minicamp was businesslike, free from holdouts and side distractions. Sam Darnold led reps with command. Milroe showed poise and incremental progress. Offensive line battles drew attention, especially around Charles Cross and the unresolved depth chart at right tackle. Walker sat out with a minor issue, but there was no panic. Even special teams got spotlight time. Michael Dixon re-signed to a 4-year, $16.2 million deal. And yes, this is the richest punter contract in NFL history. While Seattle's reset is pretty much sorted, there's work left, say analysts. The offensive line still feels a little loose. Yes, Cross is reliable indeed, but the right side needs resolution before week 1. Darnold is least expected to function behind pressure, at least not in this scheme. Remember, the WR room thins out quickly after Cup. So, if he goes down, the drop-off is going to be severe. Valdez-Scantling brings straight-line speed, and Sims offers utility. However, neither changes coverage. Defensively, the edge depth needs one more name. DeMarcus Lawrence helps, but teams that blitz need rotation. Who knows, that piece might still be sitting in free agency or waiting via trade. No team in the NFC reconstituted its philosophy like Seattle. They removed identity pieces, changed their engine, and recalibrated how they wanted to win. This is like a franchise that wants to push you into a 3rd and 8, confuse you with alignment, and make your quarterback second-guess everything after the snap. So, of course, this isn't about chasing highlight tape or doubling down on past production anymore. Presently, it's all about building a roster that frustrates you by the 2nd quarter and closes you by the 4th. What's the one final move that could complete this defensive experiment? Drop your take below. Subscribe and stick around.